Hello, Furpocalypse. So I wish I could look out and see all of you, but that's not really in the cards this year. But nonetheless, we're still rocking it. So I'm from the charity department. I'm the assistant director, and I'm just here to open it up here. I just want to introduce Mel or Kiva. They're the youth activities coordinator for True Colors. They've helped found a GSA during freshman year of high school, spent 5 years on CCS Youth Pride's e-board while simultaneously working as part of the 1 in 10 committee to better campus by opening an LGBT center, starting a preferred name program, an annual lavender graduation ceremony, and ensuring gender neutral housing and bathroom options on campus. Since graduation, Mel has volunteered with a variety of organizations and worked on their own to set up youth-led open mic events, which are part of True Colors programming now. Honestly, the resume is truly impressive to me. And at this point, I'll just hand it off to Mel to talk about what True Colors does for the community.
Cool, thank you. I have to update that because things have changed. I work for 2 youth organizations now. I started one, so we have a lot going on that I should update that for. But anyway, hi, I'm Mel. I'm Kiva in first base, so here we are. I can say that here. I use they, them all the time, and I am the youth activity coordinator, as was said. And I'm really just here to let y'all know more about what True Colors does and answer any questions you might have. Folks tend to know us for the conference, which is the largest and probably oldest LGBTQ plus youth conference in the country. Possibly the world, I don't actually know. I wasn't there. But it's a really great time. It brings about 4,000 folks together typically. Obviously we couldn't do that this year. But it's what most folks know us for, and then they tend to learn about everything else. So we have several year-round programs. I go into schools year-round, which is also happening online this year. And we do a lot of different things, all designed to support queer youth and the people who work with them. So I don't know if folks have questions right off, or like I can just talk for an hour straight, but I wasn't sure if y'all actually want me to do that. I'm excited that you're excited. I can see this chat also, so if y'all just want to ask questions there, it's totally doable. I'm gonna put a smiley face in there because I want to see what my name shows up as. Oh, it doesn't show up for me. That's interesting. My computer's been acting up all day also, so if I don't see something, somebody feel free to let me know. All right, well, I can tell you what our programs look like now. So what we had before that we're doing variations of now, we have a summer program, which is social justice and leadership focused. So that pulls a lot of like the GSA leaders and like project oriented youth into things, and they hear from different social justice speakers, activists, that kind of thing over the summer. That's Queer Academy. From there, we will typically hire on our youth team for the school year. That team will peer facilitate all of our school year activities. Generally, they end up doing workshops at different conferences, things like that. So it's a really good leadership opportunity. Those school year opportunities or school year programs during the year, we have a Friday night activity every Friday during the school year. But obviously we can't do any of that for Corona. So we switched to online. We immediately moved Friday nights online, and we really quickly learned that that just wasn't going to be enough. So like, y'all remember being a teenager, like it's kind of important to be socially connected. A lot of us were probably isolated, but still had the internet and things. So imagine that, but every day, no matter what. And now imagine that, but not necessarily being out at home. So you're isolated to just your one space, but you might not actually be able to be yourself in that one space. So we quickly learned that 2 hours on Friday wasn't going to be enough to kind of combat that feeling of being alone. So we've added a couple other programs. So on Tuesdays, we have game nights. On Wednesdays, we actually have a support discussion group. It's peer facilitated, so it's basically, I'm just there to back up. It's me and another person from YWCA Saks, and we help to kind of guide and move folks through the conversation, but it's not about us, it's about them. We almost always talk about how school's terrible and handling the pandemic badly. What can you do? But we talk about a lot of other things, including like stereotypes, gender roles, expectations for the future, climate change, like everything that's going on. It's a space for young people to kind of sort out how they feel about it. So that's actually been really active, and I'm really glad we put that together. Yeah, I also run CT Drag Fans. That's so funny. Hello. That is true. Check that out later today for some Halloween photos. Awesome. I'm glad. You don't have to tell me what high school it was. I wonder if I did it though. I've been doing this with True Colors for about 5 years now. I did it on my own before, but having like a nationally known nonprofit under my name tends to let schools know that I'm legit, and I have a way easier time of setting things up and getting in touch with folks. So pros and cons to nonprofit world. That's definitely a pro. School visits are honestly my favorite thing to do, I think. Ish. It's hard to have a favorite, but they're one of my favorites for sure. I really like going into a school and meeting with the GSA, and 9 times out of 10 when I'm like, so what's going on at the school? And the GSA group starts talking, the teachers are like, wait, what? Because they have no idea, like the homophobic nonsense that goes on. And a lot of times it's simply because they literally just haven't asked. So if anybody's a teacher, go back and ask your kids what's going on, because they want you to ask them. So ask them, they'll tell you. But typically I'll go and I'll visit with the GSA, I'll find out what's going on. Sometimes we'll just play a game. Sometimes we will plot how to get a gender neutral bathroom in the campus. Usually it's a mix of both, something like that. And then after that, if possible, I'd like to carry that forward into the adult world. So if there's a follow-up meeting with the administration, or if I'm invited to a staff meeting to kind of give my take on what's going on, things like that, that I think is the key piece that a lot of other places are missing, is that there's not like a push through. Hi, my cat wants to say hello to y'all. There's not a push forward to actually make the changes once they identify what the changes should be. So that's where I try to really not lose steam and make sure that it actually happens. It's very hit or miss whether anything actually goes through, but I think it's important that like the administration and so on here, not only from like professional best practices standpoint, but also I talked to your students and here's what they need specifically in this space at this time. So I think it's important to pair those together. 2009, all right, it might not have been me then, but I lived in Simsbury for a while, so maybe it was. I volunteered before I worked here, who knows?
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about how you interact with students and the academic institutions. Can you just go over the process a little bit on how you get in touch with those in the community that need help, and how you push forward from that, and like kind of the process?
I mean, honestly, it's more about, we do general outreach, but when it comes to specific schools, it's almost always that they reach out to us. So like I've got a GSA newsletter that goes out once a month. We're very active on social media. I've at this point got a lot of just personal relationships with folks. So a lot of the times a teacher will email me connecting me to this other person from this other school and say, hey, this worked for us. Can you help them out with this? Each situation's different, so the way that we connect is always different. So there's not really so much a formal process. If you're looking for somebody to come out and chat with your group, gsa@ourtruecolors.org or MEL @ourtruecolors.org is how to get in touch with me, or find us on Instagram, which is @truecolorsgsa. But there's not like a super formal setup system. We'll talk, you'll tell me what you think needs to happen. Ideally, I'll meet with your youth group and they'll tell me what they think needs to happen, which is often different, and we'll go from there. And it doesn't always mean a change. There's no like legal, I guess, ramifications from having us come visit. But a lot of times having a random stranger show up and tell an administrator like, hey, your students are suffering, here's why, tends to kind of knock them out of their like daily, whatever it is they're doing all day, for someone to confront them with that in a different kind of way. because it seems like it's not hard to tune teenagers out when you work with them all day, I guess, for these folks. But when somebody older shows up and is obnoxious about it, it sometimes is the push they need, and sometimes not. So both. So the question is, are we doing a conference or has it been pushed for 2021 for the in-person event? So we're hoping for 2021. Hold on a second. Math is hard. I don't do well with numbers. So this year, 2020, we did an online conference that was kind of thrown together because the conference happens in March. So our conference was set to be like March 20th or 22nd, something like that. And the state shut down March 7th. So we were like, what? Like, it was a very like last minute change. We had obviously already been talking about it a lot. We usually host at UConn, so we were in ongoing conversation with them, and they had already kind of warned us that was about to happen just from their perspective. So we weren't totally blindsided, but it was like, how do we move all of this online? So we put together something using pretty much Zoom and Facebook and Instagram, having guest speakers and such. We did like a mini conference. So like a 2-hour section each day for a week. Well, it wasn't a week. We ended up doing one a week for 6 weeks, I think it was. This year, I'm not sure what the layout is going to look like, to be honest. We've had a lot of changes and we're still kind of like finalizing what will happen, but I know it will be online. So I don't know if it'll be like as organized and big with different rooms and things like that online, or if we'll do what we did again and just do like a 2-hour a week program, just in general, just whoever shows up and watches can show up and watch. I'm not sure what the format will be, but it will be online. Which, pros and cons, like you don't have to pay to go, but you're obviously not getting the same experience fully.
On the topic of pandemic, obviously when this all got started, everybody was thinking this is completely detrimental, but I feel like we've all adapted to this being the new normal, and I'm sure that's been the case for you too. But do you think how things have changed and how like you're doing stuff digital now, virtual now? Do you think you're learning lessons from this that you can apply once we're back to the real normal?
Yeah, whenever that is and whatever it looks like, because I think things will be different. Even like 5-6 years from now, when this is all like actually over and like not a terrifying threat to everyone again, I think it'll still be different. And I kind of hope it will be different. So one thing that I guess is a kind of a silver lining of all of this, if we can look at it that way, is that everybody is suddenly very aware of accessibility needs in terms of how can people attend virtually. So a lot of folks can't attend things in person or can't attend certain things in person, either for like disability reasons or illness reasons or transportation reasons. Like there are so many reasons why someone might not have been able to attend, say, the conference in person. Financial reasons, like there's a long list. So moving things online has actually made our programs accessible to a group that couldn't have attended before. And I think that's really important to notice and keep track of. When we go back to in-person, I intend to continue holding virtual space, maybe 1 a week instead of 3 or 4, because I'll also be running in-person events again. But I don't want us to go back to full normal and just ignore the folks that we temporarily were able to connect with. We have a couple youth in our groups that are from other states, who are in really isolated parts of other states that don't have groups there. And now suddenly they have a social connection with queer youth like them, and they didn't have that before. And I definitely don't want to see, as we shift back into meeting in person, just generally socially, I don't want to see those young folks get left behind again. So the fact that now there are youth who can't make it to our usual events who can attend, I really want to stay focused on that and make sure that they continue to get support as we shift back to in-person. So that was a really roundabout way of saying it, but I guess that's kind of like my big takeaway lesson, is that there are more creative ways we can be reaching people who can't make it to an in-person event. And honestly, it's like on us to make sure that our stuff is still accessible after all this. Okay, and that was kind of Nico's question too. Do you feel that LGBTQ plus support resources are becoming easier to access now that we're all at home? Kind of. Honestly, it depends on the resource. So social activities that I do with youth, yes. A lot of young folks also don't come to in-person events because they have real bad social anxiety or whatever. So being able to interact and purely just use the chat, like think about what they're going to say, not have to worry about their tone, not have to worry about making eye contact, all of that stuff is gone. So it also makes it more accessible from that standpoint. So definitely easier to access social activities for certain folks. But there are also obviously other services that really just work better in person. Like a lot of health services are really complicated and confusing now. I know a lot of folks aren't getting the support they need in various ways because of that, because how do you do that virtually? And there also are folks who just, in-person communication is just better for a lot of people. So even though you can access the space, technically, you're still kind of alone in your home. If your internet's not working right, if you're around people that you can't actually say certain words out loud, so you have to kind of like type it in the chat and hope people realize you're the same person. Like there's a lot that could happen. So it's more accessible, but it's more tricky. It really just depends on the resource and the person, to be honest.
I see a question from Voxel in the chat, which is, what are some of the biggest barriers currently to making positive changes for gender and sexual minority youth in Connecticut schools?
Oof, I have so many feelings on that. Sorry, I missed that. This should be coffee and it's not. That's my problem. Anyway, so largest barriers currently to positive change. I mean, there are a few different things I can say. The political and cultural climate right now is a hot mess. We have just a perfect storm of like all the election stuff, and no matter how you feel about how it's going to go, tensions are high all over the place. And that can be really complicated for queer youth who are simultaneously looking at losing some of their rights and not old enough to vote. So like everyone's being pushed to vote, 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 like it's the magical answer, but they literally can't. So tensions are really high among queer youth. In that regard, obviously coronavirus has made everyone just a constant ball of anxiety. Here we are. So climate being what it is a barrier in itself right now. Before that or outside of that, I would say, I mean, it's hard to decide, but access is still an issue. Administrators taking the queer community seriously, especially like the queer youth community seriously, is an issue. A lot of folks think that you magically don't know who you are until you're 18, and then a switch kind of just flips and all of a sudden you know. But since you don't know until you're 18, they feel like they can just ignore like gender and sexual identity in high school, and that makes no sense. We all spent all of high school figuring ourselves out in some way or another, even if it wasn't that way, but like that's what being a teenager is figuring out who you are. So for them to just ignore that huge component of identity in that concept doesn't make sense and leaves a lot of kids without support. So again, each school is different. Some schools have a gender neutral bathroom, some don't. Some schools are still very focused on things like lining kids up, boy, girl, if they're like at detention or whatever it is that they're doing now. And like, that doesn't make sense. There's no real reason to do that. And it's just enforcing binaries and reminding certain kids that they don't belong. That's not what you think you're telling them, but that's what you're telling them, and that's a problem. Some schools are completely the other way around and like don't gender things. Some schools have gendered graduation gowns. Some schools have gendered like prom titles, king and queen. It's really all over the place. Some places have an LGBT section in their library. Some refuse to have LGBT books in their library. Some have Planned Parenthood come in and do queer inclusive safer sex programs. Some of them refuse to acknowledge queer people exist in their safer sex program, which lasts about 10 minutes and just says, you know, use this one item for safety, the end. There's just a really, really wide range of experiences in Connecticut. There are like standards, there are best practices, but there's no enforcement and there's no, everything's like up to interpretation. There's no like set standard. So one big barrier is honestly just figuring out, what does this specific school need? Because literally every single school needs something different. So that was a really roundabout answer as well. But like the answer is honestly, it depends.
You gave me flashbacks to sex ed, which was, for me, not abstinence only, but it's your best bet. Let's just briefly go over the other stuff, though.
Mm-hmm. Some schools still aren't. Like there was a recent law change in Connecticut that like on the surface is supposed to make it more queer inclusive, but it actually has such loopholes in it that it actually makes it easier to avoid talking about queer stuff. Like the wording is so vague in a lot of these pushes for progress that people can easily just use them to hide and actually not progress at all. So there are definitely, I would say most sex ed in Connecticut is exactly what you just said of like, abstinence is better, but this is what a condom looks like. Don't use it, don't do anything, bye. And like, that's not health and safety at all. And then we wonder about like the rates of certain things that are happening. And it's like, people aren't taught how to do this in a safe way, which that's a whole separate fight. But that's a big, access to safer sex ed information is a big push in schools right now. The gender neutral bathroom thing is an ongoing thing for schools right now. Right this second, an interesting thing is that certain clubs are being allowed to meet in person and certain ones aren't, which I feel is not legal, but it's coronavirus, what can you do? A lot of places are having like their sports clubs meet, like clubs, not just school teams, but also like the soccer club, meet in person, but not letting the GSA. One of my youth I work with on a regular basis is the leader of their GSA and is attending totally remote. So the school's telling him he can't run a club through being remote. So they're trying to like bully him into attending in person. Like it's messy all around. It's a weird time.
Also, you mentioned during your last answer that voting is important. I just want to reiterate, get out and vote.
Yeah, please do that. And if it doesn't matter to you, get out and vote for all the folks who can't. Okay. What advice would you have to that youth who wanted to attend a meeting of like the GSA, but maybe they feel they won't be accepted? Like say if they are and identify as a masked male football player who maybe feels like they can't access those resources without judgment from peers. I mean, I would say go anyway, but that's easy for me to say because I'm not there. I'll say you aren't likely to get a lot of like, I guess, nonsense from the GSA group. The GSAs tend to be built in like a confidentiality, no judgment kind of values. So a lot of folks have like that just be their GSA blanket statement of like what happens here stays here and all of that. That said, if you go back to the football team after GSA and they like know you went, some places that's a problem. Some places it is really, really not. We have all these stereotypes that we have in our heads and like think they're the same everywhere, and a lot of places are similar, but some places the football team and the GSA work really, really well together and do like a fundraiser together every year or something like that. Like the GSA will sell snacks at the football game, whatever it is. So a better world's possible. That said, the culture of individual schools varies so greatly, just town to town even. Like Connecticut is very diverse, I guess, but it has pockets of different kind of cultures and communities. There's just, it's such a wide range that it really comes down to what goes on at your school. You know, what are the values at your school? What are the values in that team and in that GSA? And then like kind of a roundabout solution right now is that silver lining from this whole quarantine thing where, okay, so you can't attend during school. You don't want your friends to know. You're worried about all that. Nobody knows what you do on Zoom in your free time. You can come to Say True Colors on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Friday on Zoom. And no one at your school is going to know that. So that's like a loophole, I guess, is if you don't feel comfortable attending at your school, you can attend elsewhere, which is not ideal because everyone should feel comfortable to do that at their own school, but the world's a mess.
From personal experience, I know at least one individual that attended as an ally first until they were comfortable.
Oh, yeah. That is a very common thing.
I have another question. Since this whole mess of a pandemic started, how has fundraising changed for True Colors? Because I know I saw that you were doing shoelaces and masks and that kind of stuff, but how has that whole landscape changed?
Yeah, it has. I'm not actually honestly involved super hard with fundraising for True Colors, and the other org that I work with, we don't actually move money at all right now. So I don't have like details on that. We do True Colors does a couple different like adult programs during the year as fundraisers, and those have been canceled or postponed or changed or whatever. That said, smaller like community organizations like what you all are doing as an example, and individual donations, I think there's probably more of right now. People are more focused on like the close to home, like within their community groups, I think, than they were before, probably because we're kind of forced to be, right? Like we're reduced to like our COVID bubble of however many people there are, and then like the internet. So I think people are more aware in a way of what local groups need their support. But that said, again, a lot of folks are struggling right now. So a lot of folks don't have the financial means to support. So like I don't have the official numbers, but everything's different. Okay, so are there any plans for maybe a standardization of access to resources through the Connecticut school system? Maybe any legislator True Colors would want to see passed? I mean, that's a big question. And are you allowed to lobby? I know sometimes nonprofits have to get special categorizing to act as lobbyist organization. Yeah. So I was gonna say I don't play with adults, but like I guess that's true. But like I connect pretty well with teenagers because I'm pretty sarcastic and don't have time for people's nonsense. And that translates really well into youth culture and does not translate really well into like business professional adult culture. I mean, I look like this. I have rainbow hair and I'm covered in dragons and stuff. So I don't get involved in a lot of that side of things. I know nonprofits, there are a lot of rules about what we can and can't do, what we can and can't say. I know we can't support any particular political candidate, and I know that lobbying is like tricky. That said, I know we've done it before. True Colors was a big push or a big component of the push for making conversion therapy illegal in Connecticut, which it is still legal in more states than not, I think, which is the practice of, they call it therapy, but it's basically like aggressive brainwashing of a queer teen to not be queer anymore, which does not work. And a lot of the like leaders of that movement have come out as queer since and said it did not work, and all it did was make them really miserable and have really damaged image and self-esteem and be really dangerous to themselves and others, basically. It's a bad idea. Like, it doesn't work. It's super dangerous for the kids, and it's super dangerous for people around the kids because of what it does to them. So that's illegal in Connecticut now, unless, of course, it's religiously based. What can you do? I mean, we can do a lot, but so I know that we were involved in that. I know we've been involved in some projects protecting reproductive health care, for example. But I know that I've never personally been like, hey, True Colors needs to support this law now. Because it's really tricky, and I'm not the like logistics person to figure out what we can and can't do. I am more the like, hey, this group of 4 teenagers wanted to do this rally, and I showed up with them and started handing out markers, and now there's 50 of us. Oops. That's more where my strengths are, to be honest. And that we can do. We can't tell youth what to say. We can't tell youth where to go. Like, you need to go to this rally and support this because the March for Our Lives is really important, because it's important. I can't tell them that, but if they tell me they're going, I can say, cool, here are some safety tips. Here are some markers and poster board. Here is where I'm going to meet you to hand out water bottles. That we can do. So we can't tell people what to say, but we can help them say it, if that makes any sense. How is your access to LGBTQ plus resources in high school, and what was your experience? That's for both of us.
My answer will be very short. Unfortunately, non-existent in my high school. There was just nothing. It wasn't until late in high school that I realized I was part of the community. So at the very least, I knew several people that were also LGBTQ. So that was basically, it was just a friend's resource, but there was no GSA. There was just nothing at my school. That changed when I went to college. I went to a community college near home, and luckily they had a GSA, and I did start going to that and get involved. And that's when the fight for marriage equality was happening in New York. So it was an important time. But yeah, in high school, absolutely nothing.
And that's still true in a lot of places. It's wild. Like, we have youth who don't know that gay marriage was illegal. Because like, even though it's relatively new to us, that's just what they grew up knowing, is that it was equal marriage, that's the end. So we have youth who don't even know certain experiences that aren't that old that we remember. But then we also have schools who don't even have a GSA at all, or like don't even have, like, there's nowhere for them to go. That's still true in some pockets. Again, Connecticut, just all these different pockets of different realities all the time. I went to school in like Cowtown, Shoreline. I guess I can just tell you Haddam Killingworth. So, hey, we didn't have anything. My best friend was the only other queer kid in the school, which was 2 or 3 years above me. So we started, like, we just found each other. Started a GSA his senior year, and he left, and I ran it for the next 2 or 3 years. But it was bad. He got specific death threats to the point where he had to be escorted from class to class for a while. I didn't get that, but I got physically bullied. I got like, one time I got pushed down the stairs and got a concussion. That was a bad time. That was probably the worst issue that I dealt with directly. But there was also just a lot of bullying and like stealing your stuff and hiding it and that kind of thing. Which I think I got a teacher fired, but that's a whole separate story. But it was bad. It was really bad. And I was as vocal as I am now, and I fought really hard. I and my one straight friend, we were real obnoxious. And I know after that, several youth have come out since then, and it's way more normalized now. So that's good. High school is a bad time. And I think that's part of, like, I've always wanted to work here. I remember actually that best friend, like, the week or so before he left for college was like, so what do you want to do with your life? And I was like, oh, I want to work at True Colors. And he was like, you can't do that. Like, they're a nonprofit. They have like 4 staff members. And I was like, watch me. And here we are. And it just happened to work that way because that was kind of just the natural place to gravitate if you want to work with queer youth. So that worked out for me. But there aren't a lot of resources. And I always knew I didn't want other people to go through that experience. And if I could be loud enough to make it less likely to happen for somebody else, that was what I was going to do. And that's what I did through college too. College was a similar rough time, and still is, actually. There's a lot of drama happening at the college level right now, but that's a whole separate conversation. Budget cuts are destroying cultural centers. So look that up and get involved there. because if cultural centers like the Rainbow Center at your campus or like the Africana Center or the whatever center go, that's the main support for marginalized students. And if they don't have that, they're not going to graduate. When I got to, this is a whole separate tangent, but when I got to that school, the older students in the GSA, I was a freshman. It was my first meeting. And they were like, does anybody want to be vice president? And I was like, I mean, sure, I guess, but why is no one else taking it? And they said, well, because e-board doesn't graduate. So like president, vice president, all them, they don't graduate. So if you take that job, you're not going to graduate. And I was like, what does that even mean? And of course it's me. So I'm like, oh, watch me. And I did graduate. But I learned real quick why, because as the leadership of the queer group, you were everything. You were everybody's counselor. You were everybody's support system. You were helping them come out to their grandparents over Thanksgiving. You were dragging kids to class because they weren't going, and then you didn't go because you were busy babysitting other people. It was a bad time. So it's part of why I fought so hard in college as well. So does True Colors reach out at the college level? Technically, no. That said, we keep doing it by accident because I do it personally, and then it just kind of falls together. So we True Colors focuses on middle and high school and sometimes younger. There are some elementary schools that have GSAs, believe it or not, so it's kind of cool. Colleges have their own systems. They're like way more supported than any given high school. They're just bigger. They have more money. They have more staff. They have more ability. 99% of their population is over 18, so they have more freedom. So they don't need support in the same way, but they definitely still need support. So True Colors, just our resources and our focus is on the younger group, but colleges also need more support. I'm part of a group that does some of that, but there's literally 2 of us. So we honestly aren't doing a lot right now just because everybody has to sleep at some point. I would love to build that further and take that further, but right now it's kind of fallen a bit. And hi, now I'm like worried I'm gonna miss something in chat, but hello. Elementary school GSAs are pretty cool. Young, really young. So folks tend to start developing their gender identity by like the age of 2. Like by the time you can talk, you know if you're a boy or a girl. And kids that young do come out and say like, everyone's calling me a boy, but I know I'm a girl. What's going on here? Like they don't have language like transgender or transition or anything like that, but they know that what everyone treats them as isn't right to them a lot of the time. Obviously not everyone. Some people don't come out until they're like 50s or 60s. Everyone's story, super different. But there are youth who are like 2 or 3 or 4 talking about how their gender doesn't match what people tell them it is. So having GSAs in elementary schools, I think is really important just for that alone. Because I just like, imagine not growing up being told you're wrong about who you are. Like imagine not having that experience. What a magical time. Imagine just being supported from day one. Like, okay, you're the person, you live in your body, you live in your mind, you live in your life. You know better than me if you're a boy or girl or something else, you get to tell me. And if we could just normalize that and like normalize kids being autonomous and kids being in charge of who they are, that would be so much better for people for a whole lot of reasons, like not just gender. I think we really need to push to normalize that and to let kids be in charge of themselves. Obviously within reason, within safety, like rules exist, but let them be in charge of who they are instead of constantly trying to mold people into what they're not. A lot of like cisgender heterosexual folks who have never struggled a day in their lives with their identity definitely still struggled with their parents or guardians or teachers telling them they were something they weren't. And we don't have to do that to kids at all. We just don't have to do that. So GSAs in elementary school are pretty cool because they acknowledge that and they push to let young people define themselves, and they give them a safe place to talk about that before, because by middle school, high school, you've definitely internalized a bunch of negativity about LGBT anything. So to combat that at the elementary school level and hopefully prevent some of that from happening, I think is really great, and I would love to see more of that.
just want to say that we probably have 10 or 15 minutes left. So if anybody's holding back questions, please go ahead and ask them.
Yeah, please do. I talk a lot, but if I'm just like floating, I'm like, what do I talk about next? But if y'all have questions, we love that. We love vague structure that we can then jump off of anyway.
So a little bit more of a personal question, but was there any one moment or one issue that inspired you to get involved in the fight for LGBTQ rights, or was it just your experience in high school? Or
yeah, I wouldn't say there was a moment. I would say my friend asking me like, what do you want to do with your life? And I was like, I don't know, work at True Colors. Like that was a big moment because I had never said it out loud before, that like I want to support queer youth like as a life goal. And he was like, you can't do that. And I was like, psh. If anything, that encouraged me way more than it would have been if he told me to go for it. So thank you. But yeah, I don't know if there's like a moment. It was just, that was my whole experience in school, was built around protecting myself against various like transphobic, homophobic, whatever nonsense. And that was just my life, was getting grades and defending myself. And I just knew it didn't have to be that way. It did not have to be that way. I was also on like, I don't know, Art Honor Society, like a few other things, because I was an overachiever in high school, go figure. And like the staff there would notice that I wasn't giving my all and I just couldn't. And I would tell them why. I'd be like, oh, well, I've been skipping, it was graphic design class for the last 2 months because every time I walk in, kids steal my stuff and like bully me and tell me all this other, like it was bad. I didn't go to class for a good 3 months. I got away with it because I got straight A's in all my other classes. So the school kind of just ignored that it was happening. But that stuff doesn't have to happen. It just doesn't. So I started the fight there. In college, I got way better at it. I pushed way harder. And I got way better at knowing that tactics there were tactics outside of me, like call the news. It will immediately stop the nonsense. You'll get different nonsense, but it changes things. But I learned a lot more about how to find out who my allies are, how to find out what they needed and kind of combine what we needed together into one demand so that there were twice as many voices asking for the same thing. I learned a lot more about tactics like that. And I was like, this is what we need to do. Like, there's no reason I should have spent my entire college career fighting for my right to be there. It shouldn't be like that for me. It shouldn't be like that for anyone behind me. It shouldn't be like that for other groups. So it kind of became my life mission, I guess, to help support other folks do that. And sometimes that's at the college level. A lot of times it's at the high school or middle school level. But it's infuriating to me that we still have to fight for our rights to be in places sometimes, or that we have to fight for our right to be acknowledged as ourselves in those places. So I guess this is just what I'm doing.
Out of curiosity, does True Colors participate in, I don't know if there's like a Stamford Pride every year. Obviously, this year there probably wasn't, but.
There are a lot of town-by-town Pride events in Connecticut. I don't know what that's about other than Connecticut's very like, this is our town and we don't leave. But we basically table at a lot of them when they're in person. Them being online, we've definitely not been as involved. But I'm sure once things go back to being more in person, we'll be doing more of that.
I don't know if we have any more questions, but if you have anything else on your mind, go for it.
I mean, this isn't relevant to anything else, but I feel like if I can't tell this story here, I can't tell it anywhere. But there have been a few times where I've gone to GSA and I've had kids like pull me aside at the end and ask me if I know what a furry is. And I'm always like, tell me, like, go for it. And like these kids have a community online, whatever. They've never come out to their friends, things like that. Like they've got no idea what to do with themselves. So they'll like explain themselves to me, and sometimes they'll show me an image and I don't have my wallet within reach. But I have like a mini badge of Kiva in my wallet. So I'll pull it out and I'll be like, listen, there's an overlap. You're going to be okay. And I've done that like maybe like 5 or 6 times. Like doesn't happen often, maybe once or twice a year at a school visit. But one of them I did that and it like changed this kid's whole demeanor. Like it was very cool to see because he felt like he went to GSA because he felt like that was the closest thing he had to feeling like he was accepted and normal. And I don't think he was out about having a persona or any of that there. But learning that there was an overlap and that it was normal enough where like their guest speaker had like a little badge in their wallet and was like, here you go, this is me, check this out. They were just like amazed. Like obviously an adult had never said anything to them before about it. So I just wanted to like share that because I felt like that was really cool. There's a big overlap. And I think it's very cool that the communities are working together and that we can kind of tag team helping those kids come out of their shell. One of the most rewarding moments. Oh, sorry. Do we have time for this one? Yeah, exactly. Sorry. Yes, you're like, I will not talk. Good. I'm glad you love that story. I feel like I could have told it better, but it was a really great moment. One of the most rewarding moments you've experienced when working with LGBTQ youth. That moment over and over again is why I still do it. So it's not usually about like being in this community, but I had a kid, like I did a student training for like a peer leadership program, whatever, maybe 2 years ago. And there were maybe 30 kids in the room and some of them talk nonstop and some of them don't talk at all. And I had this one kid who didn't talk at all, which isn't that strange, honestly, but she waited around until everybody left afterwards. And she came up to me and said, I didn't know there was a word. And I said, for what? And she said, I don't want to get married. I don't want to date. And I thought I was broken because we had played a game about vocabulary and asexual is one of the words. And none of them knew that was a word. So she was like shell shocked. She was like, I didn't know. Like, there are people like me. And I was like, yes, yes, there are people like you. You're not alone in this. And it really just like blew her mind. She was like, everything was shifted because she had grown up thinking she was broken. Like all of her friends have crushes on people. All of her, for like going into high school, all of her friends start talking about like interest in sex and things like that. And she just didn't have any. And she thought she was broken and thought there was something wrong with her and didn't talk about it and kept to herself and all of that because she never wanted to date. She never wanted to explore her sexuality. She just wanted to hang out with her friends and live her life. Which is not true of every asexual, but she didn't know that that concept existed, let alone there was a whole spectrum in all of this. So for her to just have that moment of, oh, I'm not alone, there's a word for that. Like other people are just like me. That moment over and over again. Sometimes it's about gender, sometimes it's about sexuality, sometimes it's about hobbies, I don't know, but like just realizing they're not the only kid who went through this or feels this way or has this identity and they can communicate with other people and connect. Like, that's what I'm here for, to be honest. Yeah, same. So there's always people like you. I wish they taught that in school. People need to go out and look for people like themselves. Yeah, there's still a focus in a lot of schools on like assimilation and being the same as everyone else, which is weird because they will say like, you're the only you there is and be yourself, but then there's no space for difference. And that's where they get that message that like they're the only asexual in the world. I thought I invented being genderqueer when I was in high school because that was not a word. And I was like, I'm not a boy, but like I'm definitely not a girl either. What's going on? And like just how much time and trouble would it have saved if someone was like, yeah, that's a thing. Here you go. Here's a word. So
I kind of feel like it's a systemic issue because we educate in batches, so we're already thinking of students as groups of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, see your kids as individual people. Like, if I could just convince everyone who works with kids to do that, the world would be different.
Yeah, the entire education system could be a little bit more personal.
I have a lot of opinions on that, but that's a whole other rant.
And going back to the story before the last one about you showing your little badge, I one of my friends in high school, I found out he was gay, and then I found out he was the only other furry in my high school, and that was the moment where I was like, wait, this is a thing? It's not just me? It's
Awesome.
it's an interesting moment when you discover another person like you.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, well, we have a few minutes left, so I just want to do a quick plug, and then I'll throw it to you for final thoughts. But I just wanted to say thanks to everyone for attending, and extra special thanks to Mel or Kiva for taking time out of their schedule to hang out with us, go over everything True Colors does, answer questions. Please, if you can give anything, go to furpocalypse.tv/charity. Any amount helps. We each do a little bit, and it adds up to a lot. And right now, everybody's suffering. Nonprofits are suffering. So any little bit will go a long way. And I guess that's it from me. Mel, Kiva, if you want to give final thoughts, go for it.
Awesome. I mean, I don't have any like formal final thoughts, but yeah, every little bit helps. We are working on a deficit right now. I can tell you that much. I'm not part of like the budget meetings, but I know that things are rough. But I also know that that's copy pasted to a lot of other nonprofits right now. So definitely that helps, but also like literally just being nice to people helps. I know how corny that sounds, but that moment of like, oh, there are other people like me, or there are other people who won't reject me for being a furry, being asexual, being genderqueer, whatever it is, that can honestly make such a difference. Like that whole story, do y'all know the starfish story? I ask like you can answer me. But that there are two people walking down the beach, one of them throwing starfish back in the water because they're getting washed up on the beach. And the other person says, why are you doing that? Like, you're not making a difference. They wash back up. And the first person picks one up and says, do you see this starfish? Threw it in the water and said it made a difference to that starfish right now. So like, we're not going to change the world overnight, but we can change the world for a person. And if we each did that, that would change the entire full world. So that's also what I'm about and why I'm here. So that's it. That's my corny closing thoughts. Feel free to reach out to me on email, either gsa@ourtruecolors.org or mel@ourtruecolors.org. Even if you just want to chat or ask a question or whatever. Sometimes I take 3 days to answer my email. Sorry, but I'm there. Or you can find us on Instagram at TrueColorsGSA. Those are definitely the best ways to get in touch. And Instagram is the best way to find out what else we're working on at any given time. And thank you. Thank you all for having me. Thank you for thinking of True Colors for this. I really appreciate that.
Right, we love True Colors, so thank you.
Thank you.